in 2019, which is the last data that I have, foundations in the United States gave $75.69 billion to charity. Private individuals gave $309.6 billion to charities. It is a huge, huge situation that we're dealing with. North Carolina is ranked number 17 in giving to charities, even though we're in the bottom 4, 5, or 6 of poor states determined by per capita income. And so even in the face of that, and we'll be excited to see what our giving looks like even in the face of the pandemic that we have just come through. It will be very interesting to see what 2020 giving looks like also. Just basically how we got here. In 1958, the state of Alabama attempted to force disclosure of the NAACP donor list to be able to root out their supporters. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of the NAACP, recognizing that the First Amendment protects people's freedom of association by requiring a high bar for government-mandated disclosure of nonprofit donors. Hadn't been a lot of conversation about that until just recently. We have several states, led by California, whose attorneys general are attempting very quietly to force states or to force private organizations in their nonprofits in their state to release these donor lists. They say that they need them in order to be able to make sure that fraud is not going on within their state. They guarantee that the validity or their ability to keep these private and confidential from the state. They have no problem with that. I question all of those things. Several other states are joining with California in beginning to do that. We here in North Carolina want to join the other 4 or 5 states that already have donor privacy laws in place, and we want to be able to protect our citizens before they're intimidated, before they run into situations where their giving records become public information. And so that's what this bill is about. I'll go over it very briefly, and then we will answer questions. Section 1 requires that nonprofit boards of directors to approve any disclosure of that nonprofit's donors, and we just clarified that first the donor themselves has to give permission to the board of directors. Section 2 adds donor privacy protection to the Public Records Act. Section 3 clarifies that the protections added in Section 2 of this bill apply to existing processes wherein the nonprofit conducts business with the state required public financial statements, charitable gifts, annuities, health care, etc., and charitable solutions licensing. Section 4 clarifies that the protection in this bill do not apply at all to campaign finance giving. And finally, Section 5 prohibits public servants, that's you and I, or any state or local employees from disclosing donor information that they learned in whatever position it is that they're elected to. I don't have to tell you what public disclosure of giving records of the private citizens in North Carolina would do to our charitable giving in this state. It would have a very, very chilling effect on giving. Giving to these charities, even as North Carolina is a very, very giving state, it would have such an effect that you would see an immediate, profound drop-off in giving, because most people give and they don't want the acknowledgement of their giving. Most people don't even use it on their income taxes, because I think about 65% of people don't itemize, which is the only place other than here in North Carolina you can use charitable giving on North Carolina income tax. But you can just imagine what kind of intimidation could be used if someone had your church giving records, if someone had your records of who you've given to any nonprofit in North Carolina, whoever you support that maybe your boss doesn't support, whoever you support that maybe your neighbors don't support, Can you imagine what that would look like if we allow that to happen? There is a bill, I think it was heard last week, currently before the U.S. Supreme Court, that deals with this very policy again. All indications are that the Supreme Court may very well find in the donor's favor that those records would be kept secret and private, but we can never depend on what the Supreme Court might do. And so, as I said, North Carolina wants to get out in front of this, and I appreciate all of the effort and the work that has been done on this to make sure that it is constitutionally sound by the John Locke Foundation, by former Representative Paul Stam, who helped immensely with the legal part of this, by our own staff. I want to thank the bipartisan support that have signed on for this bill, because I think to every single one of us, I would not want to go back to my district and tell them, oh, by the way, everything that you give to private organizations is getting ready to be on the front page of the paper. And so with that, I just ask your support for this. Again, this is proactive. Nobody is currently trying to get those records in North Carolina, but don't be surprised if we're not somewhere on that list of being targeted to do this. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I would ask for your indulgence for any questions, and there may be one or two speakers that might want to speak on behalf of this bill, just very briefly.
First, I have a question from Senator Marcus, who is remote. Senator Marcus.
Thank you for recognizing me, Mr. Chair. There's a lot that's not being said about what this bill would actually do. There's a Supreme Court case that I'd like to mention, which is Buckley v. Vallejo, in which the Supreme Court found that disclosure informs voters about sources of political spending and helps guard against corruption. That's the Supreme Court precedent that this bill is trying to overturn. Just yesterday in this committee, we heard a bill arguing that disclosure of state employee personnel information was critical. There was a lot of talk about how important transparency is and the public's right to know. But now we have the exact opposite. We have a bill here that flies in the face of what most Americans, I think, both Republican and Democrat, want. And that's transparency and who is influencing our political process, our democracy. We already have too much dark money in politics, and this would make that worse. The bill sponsor spoke a lot about church donations and nice 501c3s that don't get involved in politics. And if that's as far as this bill went, I might agree with you, but it doesn't. Those donations, by the way, are already confidential. They aren't disclosed publicly. But this bill goes way too far. It includes 501c4 groups like the NRA, like the Club for Growth, and some left-leaning organizations that are 501c4s and definitely get involved in politics. These are groups that can openly support or oppose candidates. They can lobby for policies that they like. And if we pass this law, Alex will be very happy because they have an agenda for allowing even more dark money in politics, and this would help that along greatly. It allows that shell game that they use where 501c4s will give to super PACs, and then the super PAC only has to disclose its donors, not the 501c4 donors. You can use a chain of shell groups, LLCs, and 501c4, so you don't know who's giving to the candidates because it's all funneled through 501c4s. Instead of working for transparency, this would take us backwards. I don't think citizens should be cut out of knowing who influences their politicians and the decisions that we make. Both Republican and Democrat should be accountable to citizens. Big money interests are funding some politicians and some policies, and this bill would take us backwards. I completely disagree with this bill.
Sounds like that was mostly a comment, but would you like to respond, Senator Sanderson?
I would, and I want to respectfully disagree with my colleague. As of the bill that was passed out of here yesterday and this bill, there is a huge difference in government transparency and transparency for private individuals. There's not even a comparable there. where government should be transparent, because government is an arm of the citizens of this state. Private individuals have the right to privacy far beyond what we as government employees have. And as far as the dark money that Senator Marcus was talking about, current electioneering laws already require donor disclosure and restrictions for nonprofits that engage in political activity, including the NRA and those other organizations that do that. This bill doesn't do anything to change, to weaken that current law.
Next, we have Senator Lazar and then Senator Steinberg, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, Senator Sanderson touched on exactly what I was going to comment on. Those two issues are distinctively different. We're talking about the utilization of tax dollars to fund salaries versus private dollars that are earned and spent, and that is and should be protected under that act. And I think this clearly does that, and you can't compare the two. I fully support it.
Senator Steinberg.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I obviously fully support it because my name is on the bill. And the thing that concerns me more than anything else is this counterculture that we're experiencing today. It is something I thought I would never see, and I think most of us have imagined we would never see in our lifetime. This persecution that goes on by folks who ideologically agree with someone else or someone else's opinion, or where someone else would like to contribute by expressing their support for a particular issue or cause, and they can lose their jobs as a result, have people banging on their door. It's this period that we're in right now is scary as hell. And this is one bill that I think is going to help protect the very people that I think the preponderance of people that we were sent here to represent. So I am in full, absolute, 100% support of this bill.
Senator Muhammad.
Question for staff, Mr. Chair.
Yes, you can ask your question, Senator Muhammad.
So it sounds like, because originally I was thinking that this bill only applied to 501c3 nonprofits. So I just want to make sure there's clarification, not only just for me, the rest of the committee, the rest of the audience. So does this strictly apply to, sorry, Ms. Churchill, I thought, staff was Ms. Churchill, does this strictly apply only to a 501c3 that participates in nonprofit activities?
No, sir. It applies, Mr. Chair, if I might, it applies to all nonprofits, however they are denominated, whether they are the 501c3 or any of the other 501 organizations.
Follow up, Senator Muhammad.
Yeah, Ms. Churchill, so when you have these PACs like 501c4s, are those still considered nonprofits?
Mr. Chair, they are 501cs under the IRS designation, and this would cover those.
Okay. Just a comment for
Senator Muhammad.
For the bill sponsor. Senator Sanderson, again, I kind of have to agree with Senator Marcus. I mean, if that's what, we want to follow the trail, especially if there's political activity. I think the people need to know at the end of the day, again, both for left-leaning and right-leaning organizations, about who's funding this type of messaging to the people of North Carolina at the end of the day. Is this money coming from corporations or extremely wealthy donors outside of state donors? I think that's important information for transparency. Don't you think?
I agree, but I think that the general statutes and especially our election laws already take care of that on the federal level and the state level. I don't think that there's any open place where, and don't get me wrong, I know that illegal activities take place. That's to be expected in an organization as big as government is, especially with in the political scene. But still, I think on the up and up that most of the situations, most of the problems that you think might occur because of this would not. And these organizations, these states that are going after these records aren't confining their method to just the 501c4s. They're going after the 501c3s also. And so because the federal government groups those, even though they're different categories, it still groups them as nonprofits.
So, Mr. Chair, another question for staff then.
Yes, Senator Muhammad, ask a question.
So, Ms. Churchill, so based on what Senator Sanderson is saying, he's saying that this type of donor information is already reported when it comes to those types of 501c4s that participate in political activity. And this bill wouldn't limit that?
Ms. Churchill?
Mr. Chair, so Senator Muhammad, just to be clear about the way the bill is structured, the bill is broad. It would say that the state, in the actors for the state, those state officials, employees, can't disclose those donor lists, and the board of directors can't even disclose those donor lists for the 5 nonprofit charities organized in this state without the consent of the donor. However, there is nothing in this bill that changes federal law that requires reporting of donor lists at the federal level to the IRS, whether that be the Form 990, whether that be to the Federal Elections Commission. There is nothing in this bill that changes the state campaign finance provisions that require disclosure of certain donors for electioneering communications. Those are specifically exempted by the bill, so that those would remain public records.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Senator Muhammad, follow up.
Ms. Churchill, isn't it currently, because this is my understanding, and I'm no expert in this area, that's why I'm trying to understand from you, the expert. Isn't there already current controversy about donors that donate to these 501c4s, for example, and we already don't know who they are oftentimes, even on a federal level?
Ms. Churchill?
Senator Muhammad, I'm glad to look into it, but the federal law is the federal law, and the 501c4 has to comply with it to maintain its 501c4 status. Whether or not the federal law allows for some wiggle room in the disclosure, I'll be happy to look into that for you.
Just a comment, Mr. Chair.
Comment, Senator Muhammad.
It's my understanding. I mean, that's just what I've always thought, is that these type of super PACs and 501c4s, those donor lists are generally closed out and secretive. And I don't want my state now to join in that. If we've already got issues on a potential federal level, we need to make reforms there. Again, I think this is about transparency, Senator Sanderson. This is for holding all political sides accountable, just like as elected officials, the people of North Carolina, who's contributed to our campaign and who's how we've spent our financial resources from our political campaign contributions. I think those are important issues to look at for organizations as well.
Senator Sanderson? Okay. Senator Newton, and then Senator Lazar.
Thank you. Just one quick comment. As I sit here and listen to this, realizing we are sitting in a moment of our history called cancel culture, and we're seeing it happen. It's actually happening, that individuals are being attacked instead of issues being attacked. I would just encourage the opponents of this bill to turn their energy toward fighting and arguing and debating issues instead of trying to find ways to attack people who seem to who support things that they may not. This just seems like the opposition just seems like I want to keep opportunities to attack individuals who support something I don't support. So I'm 100% in support of this bill.
Thank you, Senator Newton. Senator Lazar.
Again, just a comment to add to Senator Newton. It's basically not a left or right issue. This is a protection for folks to be able to donate their hard-earned money in the manner of which they choose without retribution of their political views, social views, and how they give their money, regardless whether you're on left or right. You shouldn't have to be subject to retribution, and people are, citizens are, regardless of where they sit. What they believe comes back to haunt them if it's disclosed, and they should have that right to privacy. And Senator Newton hit it right on the head. And that's why we should support this. We're supporting the right to spend your hard-earned money in the manner of which you choose without retribution. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Have a motion for favorable report from Senator Newton. I know we have a few people that have signed up to speak either for or against this bill. We have first David Heinen, NC Center for Nonprofits. I'll grab her when you message her back and say hello. I'll get her when we come back.
Thank you, Chairman Brett. David Heinen with the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. We're a 501c3 nonprofit that works with other 501c3 nonprofits throughout North Carolina. A couple comments on the bill. I think nonprofits generally appreciate the idea of protecting their donors, as Senator Sanderson explained today. A couple thoughts on the bill. Sections 2 through 5 of the bill, I think, kind of provides some protections that make a lot of sense for donor information that's already redacted under federal tax law, and just making sure that that's not made public. We do have some concerns, and we've heard from a number of charitable nonprofits about the language in the amended version of Section 1 of the bill, and I think it's an unintended consequence of it that may create some burdens for nonprofits by requiring them to get the permission of donors before using it. Kind of customarily, most nonprofits find that most of their donors actually do want to be thanked publicly and do want that acknowledgement, and they often put their donor lists on their website, in publications. They thank sponsors of their conferences, of their meetings, variety of other places that they list there. And particularly for smaller nonprofits, it may create a burden to have to get that donor permission else.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your comments. Next, we have Melissa Crom. Again, you have a minute and a half. We're trying to move quite a few number of bills through here, so try to sum it up as quickly as you can.
I'm asking you to vote no on this bill. All of these donor privacy laws work toward the same general goal, to preventing the public identification of big donors to nonprofit organizations. The goal strikes at the heart of the important government interest that the Supreme Court decided in the 1976 case, Buckley versus Vallejo, that Senator Marcus mentioned, in which the court found that disclosure informs voters about sources of political spending and helps to guard against corruption, rather than in trying to ensure privacy of wealthy special interests. You should hear the Supreme Court's full-throated endorsement of disclosure's constitutionality and give the public more information about the sources trying to rig our political system in their favor. And to try to clear up some of the questions that we've had about this, the bill sponsors were trying to tell you it doesn't actually affect political spending. It does. Nonprofit groups can be used to hide the identity of donors by using a shell game and thus reduce transparency in elections. Donor privacy laws make it even harder for state agencies and the public to get access to this information because they can tie the hands of the agencies that would typically investigate groups like 501c4s for campaign spending violations. Despite the exception for PACs, that exception doesn't prevent dark money tactics. What we see most often is a 501c4 make a contribution to a super PAC. That super PAC, when disclosing its donors, typically only has the disclosure that the nonprofit, but not the donors to the nonprofit. I could help here. Give me some more time.
I'll give you another minute.
Another common tactic is setting up a chain of shell groups. First, a person creates a contribution to an anonymous LLC, then the LLC to a 501c4, but the LLC doesn't have to name its donors when it does so. The 501c4 donates the money to the super PAC. Typically, the super PAC will only report the 501c4 group as a donor. But even trying to dig further back, there's no way to determine who contributed to the LLC that started it all. Even if the law would require the donor, the 501c4 to disclose its donors, all we would get is the name of the LLC with no further information. Donor privacy laws just codify these loopholes and make it even harder for agencies to investigate possible violations, let alone make the information transparent to the public. Please vote no on this bill.
Thank you, ma'am. We have a motion for a favorable report from Senator Newton. We have no one else who has signed up. I'm sorry, we have one more comment from Senator Marcus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did want to respond to earlier, the bill sponsor was talking a lot about individual donors. This bill does really nothing to help the person who wants to give $100 to a nonprofit that's a 501c3. As the bill sponsor said at the beginning, we are a very charitable state. There's been no chilling effect now under current law. People give to their nonprofits. What this bill is really about is trying to protect the people who want to give a whole lot of money secretly to influence politics. And this bill is paving the way for them to do that. I think we should, on a bipartisan basis, fight back against that and make sure voters know that we as politicians are fine with them knowing who's funding our campaigns, who's attacking our opponents, and who's working for what policies. And this bill is a bad, bad idea.
Okay, thank you so much. Senator Marcus, I have motion for favorable report to Senate Bill 636 as amended, rolled into a new PCS with a serial referral to rules from Senator Newton. All in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. No. Again, that is favorable to Senate Bill 636, donor privacy as amended, rolled into a new PCS with a serial referral to rules. Next.